Shalom חברים. Today, Parashat Chayyei Sarah, portion of Chayyei Sarah, and we're going to do it together with Aldous Huxley, and specifically with his work, The Perennial Philosophy. And so let's dive right in from just quoting the introduction, where Huxley explains what perennial philosophy is. So he writes here, the psychology that finds in the soul something similar to, or even identical with, divine reality. The ethic that places man's final end in the knowledge of the immanent and the transcendent ground of all being. The thing is immemorial and universal. So that's Huxley's definition of perennial philosophy, and I will explain more. So Huxley is a British writer, author, and philosopher. Some would argue that not so much a philosopher, depending. He was born in 1894, died in 1963, and most of you probably know his incredible dystopian novel Brave New World, which is really considered one of the greatest dystopian novels of the 20th century, and I would argue maybe perhaps of all time. But he took his step in philosophy a little bit, and was especially interested in perennial philosophy. Now, Huxley, it's important to say, is not considered one of the great thinkers of this stream of philosophy, but he did have a big role in popularizing it, and bring into Western familiarity. And the term itself, according to Huxley, was coined by Leibniz, actually, even though scholars today argue that as well. And what it is, to really put it in simple terms, it's mysticism. It's basically the mystical ideas that you can find in any religion. Another name for it is the esoteric aspect of every religion, is this religion's perennial philosophy, if you will. The word itself, perennial, means something that is reoccurring and everlasting. So you can find this term in botanics, where there's perennial plants. So these are plants that keep growing in perpetuity. The perennial philosophy basically it begins with the idea that there is something that all religions share, that the core of all religion is mutual, and we can find that core in every religion's mystic or mysticism's teachings and writing. And what it is some form of united divinity that is both immanent and transcendental to our reality, meaning it is both apparent in our reality, in the observable world, but it's also external to it. It's also beyond it. And even though the different religions have all different practices and doctrines and theologies, perennial philosophers will argue that they all share this core. And the way to tap into that united divinity is through usually the breaking of the ego, the unselfing, and practicing love and justice. And this is something that, again, is mutual, is shared by all religions. And again, Huxley was considered more an amateur in the field. He really this perennial philosophy book is an anthology that he wrote, bringing perennial thinking rather than writing his own. And if you are interested in that type of thinking, you should look into what is also known as the traditionalist philosophy or traditionalist school, towards thinkers such as René Guénon or Ananda Kumaraswamy, or Fridtjof Schuon, who are probably the most known of that school. And as far as our tradition, as far as Judaism, our esoteric thinking, our our mysticism writings, of course, is known as Kabbalah. Before I continue to that, it's important to mention that, interestingly enough, in Judaism, Kabbalah did not remain as an esoteric thinking, because it has became the foundation of the entire Hasidic movement and Hasidic thinking. And it's also, even nowadays, very, very popular, and is studied by religious and non-religious Jews alike, and it keeps growing and spreading. So while Kabbalah is still the esoteric aspect of our tradition, it's not that esoteric, if you think about it. And I'm not going to get into an explanation what Kabbalah is, but I want to talk about one aspect in Kabbalist thinking, and this is the aspect of Shekhinah, or the term Shekhinah. So the term Shekhinah comes from the root Shechana, Shin Chaf Nun, which is basically the root of dwelling, to dwell somewhere. So, for example, Shechen, which comes from a root, is neighbor, right? It's a person that dwells next to you. And of course, there's the word Mishkan. Mishkan, the tabernacle, also shares the same root, because the tabernacle was the dwelling place, right? For the Shekhinah, for God. So, it comes from that root. Now, what is the Shekhinah according to Kabbalist thinking? So basically, there are two aspects of divinity according to this tradition. One is masculine and one is feminine. And simply put, the masculine part of God is the transcendental part, is the one that is external to our reality, ineffable. The immanent, or the part that does dwell here in the world within us, is called Shekhinah. So Shekhinah is the feminine side of God that can be felt, if you will, in the observable reality. Now, our portion this week, which is called the Chayyei Sarah, and despite the name Chayyei Sarah, which means the life of Sarah, this portion really focuses on Rebecca and on finding Rebecca as the wife for Isaac. So specifically, there's this love story that actually ends up really successfully. It's a great match. As soon as Abraham's servant brings Rebecca into Isaac, there's love at first sight, and she becomes his wife. And this successful match ends with the following verse. ויביאיה יצחק האוהלה, שרה אמו, ויקח את רבקה, ותהי לו לאישה, ויאהביה, וינחם יצחק אחרי אמו. Translating to, Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife. Isaac loved her and thus found comfort after his mother's death. So, commentators asking, what does it mean, וינחם יצחק אחרי אמו? Basically, what does it mean, found comfort after his mother's death? So Rashi, to explain it, brings a midrash. He brings Bereshit Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah, to explain. And here is what Rashi has to say. He brought her into the tent, and she became exactly like his mother Sarah. Pay attention to the word exactly, okay? That is to say, the words signify as much as, and behold, she was Sarah, his mother. For whilst Sarah was living, the light had been burning in the tent from one Shabbat evening to the next. There was always a blessing in the dough, basically a miraculous increase in the dough at all times, and a cloud was always hanging over the tent, the divine protection. But since her death, all these had stopped. However, when Rebecca came, they reappeared. So what this midrash says is that when Sarah was in the tent, the Shekhinah dwelled in that tent as well at all times, meaning her candle never burned off, never went. It kept lit from one Shabbat to the next, meaning in perpetuity. And her dough was always in a state of rising. And there was a cloud that dwelled over that tent, so the tent of Shekhinah. So that midrash says that when Sarah died, all of these miracles, if you will, ceased. But they all came back as soon as Rebecca entered the tent. And this is why it was exactly like Rebecca replaced Sarah. Now, the Ramban, Nachmanides, explains that our forefathers and our foremothers were the chariots of God. So basically, what he explains is that God's immanent presence in the world, the Shekhinah, was something that they carried with them. All of our forefathers and mothers carried with them, and until, of course, Moses came and really brought the Shekhinah on a national level to be carried by all the Israelites while they built the Mishkan. There's this book here that I really, really like, Shem Shmuel, which is Rabbi Shmuel Bornstein. Beautiful, beautiful commentary. And what Bornstein does, he really shows how there is a direct parallel between Sarah's tent and the tabernacle and the Mishkan. That basically, he says that the Ner Ma'aravi, the candle, the Western candle that was always burning in the Mishkan, is exactly like Sarah's candle that constantly burned. And then he says that the Lechem Apanim, the bread of display, or the shobet, however you want to call it, that was always warm in the tabernacle, was exactly like that Sarah's dough that always was in a state of rising. And then, of course, there's the cloud that dwelled around the Mishkan, which is the exact cloud that dwelled over Sarah's tent. And what does it tell us? It tells us that the Shekhinah, that divine, immanence in our world, was present in Sarah's tent and in the exact same way in the tabernacle. And there's a medieval Kabbalist book from the 13th century, very popular book called Chayyei Ora. It's written by Joseph Gicatilla. And he really has an entire description of the story of the Shekhinah in our world. And what he explains there is that at first, Shekhinah, right when the world was created, dwelled everywhere. And it was the sin of the first man, of Adam and Eve, Adam v'Chava, it was the first sin that then had it go away and climb back up to higher spheres. And it wasn't just Adam's sins, it was of course a Cain, right? Cain and Abel, and the first murder, and then the Noah's generation, and with all those sins. So all of those sins that went one after another made the Shekhinah, every time a generation sinned, it went to a higher sphere and a higher sphere. And it was not until Abraham and until our forefathers, foremothers, that started to pull it, really use the word pull it back down again into our world. Now, our ancestors were not able to pull it down so it dwells everywhere like in the beginning, but they were like carriers of it, like chariots, right? So it went with them wherever they went. And of course, we have Moses, and eventually, we have Kings David and Solomon, who brought the Shekhinah into the Holy Temple. And that dwelling was so powerful that it really projected towards all other nations and towards the world. And that Shekhinah, of course, was, once the temple was destroyed, that Shekhinah scattered into each and every one of us, and is since then carried by the people of Israel wherever they may be inside each and every one of us. And we're not going to be able to use that power to project to the entire world until we bring that power together. And how do we bring that power together? We build another temple. But that temple will never be built until we will be united. And, a lot of contemporary scholars look at the situation within the people of Israel today and the sharp divisions. And that basically puts us further and further away from our mission, which is to take that Shekhinah that dwells in each and every one of us. And only once we all agree that a temple will be built, it's not going to happen. Now, of course, as I'm saying these words, I know that there are many people watching this who really disagree that another temple needs to be built, but that's exactly the point. And but it's more than just the unification of the Jewish people. Once the Shekhinah is unified, it's going to project universally. And what it's going to cause is it's going to cause a unification of everyone else, of all the nations, back to that oneness, back into that divinity. Now, perennial philosophy really comes from that oneness, and in that it really relies on Platonic thinking and Neoplatonic thinking to go back to that one, and that is the universal unity. And Huxley wrote his book at the end of the Second World War. And you can imagine that for him, this book was more than just putting together an anthology of perennial philosophy. It was a mission, it was a calling, basically saying, look at us and look at what we've done, right? The Second World War. In the core of all of our beliefs, there's the exact same thing. It's where you find perennial philosophy, you find that we all strive to get back to that divinity, and it's in that esoteric thinking that teaches us how to communicate with it and what to do in practicality that we can find the answer. And we should start that practice. So if we take Huxley's message and we take our portion message, what we need to remember is that we should constantly keep our guard to not let our ego take over us. We should keep our candles lit and our dough risen and the cloud around our tent, so as we will always have reminders to let love and justice prevail. And we should continue practice that until eventually we can all come together and let the Shekhinah out. Shabbat Shalom.